This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so Parshas Yitro is pretty fascinating. Yitro, we know, was let's get started. Page 394, Perek Yudchet, Pasuk Aleph. Vayishma Yitro Kohen Midyan Chotain Moshe. Et kol asher asa Elokim leMoshe Yisrael Amo. And Yitro heard. Who's Yitro? We know who Yitro is, right? But yet the pasuk finds the need to reiterate two aspects of who he was. First of all, he was the Kohen of Midian, right? Now, he wasn't just the Kohen, the priest of Midian. He had been the high priest of Midian. And actually, right, if you look forward for a second to page 396, so Yitro said in verse 10, right? Baruch Hashem. He's the first one to say Baruch Hashem. Huh? Is that interesting? Blessed is God who saved you from the hand of Egypt, from the hand of Pharaoh, who saved the nation from underneath the hand of Egypt. Now I know that God is greater, Mikol HaElohim, from all of the gods. Now, he can state that very, very in a substantive manner, right? In an unequivocal manner. Why? Because we're taught that he had experimented, explored every type of idolatry in the world, and only then did he come around to Judaism. See, he had firsthand experience. So going back to Pasuk 1, right? He was the Kohen Midian. He was the high priest of Midian, and yet he was the Chotain Moshe, and yet he was the father-in-law. Good morning, Judy. Yet he was the father-in-law of Moshe, the father-in-law of the greatest prophet that ever lived, the father-in-law of the leader of the Jewish people, right? A fascinating, fascinating person. Vayishma Yitro, he heard. What did he hear? All that God had done for Moshe and Israel, that he had taken Israel out from Egypt. Now, Rashi points out a number of things here. First of all, his name, he has 7 different names, Yitro and also Yeter, right? He added on a Parsha of the Torah. We'll soon see he's going to give Moshe some ideas on structuring things, right? You know how it works with in-laws. They always have some ideas on how to do things a little bit better, and they're not so reticent about sharing those ideas, right? But what's fascinating to me is that this Parsha, which is the Parsha of Kabbalat HaTorah, of receiving the Torah, of Mount Sinai, of the 10 Commandments, of the whole purpose of our leaving Egypt, the whole purpose of creation as we understand it. If we go back a few steps, if God created the world as we understand it in order that there would be these creations who have the ability to connect to him, so we need to know how we're supposed to connect to him. And without knowing how to connect to him, so then we're just groping around in the dark. And that's why I always say every religion has its revelation narrative of how we down here know what God up there, so to speak, wants us to do. And Judaism is unique in, as we see in this week's Parsha, that the revelation narrative was not to one individual, but it was to the entire nation. So if the purpose of creation as we understand it is that there would be these free-willed beings who can choose to live in a godly manner, then we need to know what is the godly manner. And actually the Torah gives the godly manner for the Jewish people and for the entire world. We have the Taryag, the 613 mitzvot for the Jews, and we have the Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, the 7 Noahide mitzvot for the entire for the entire planet Earth, for everyone here, because Judaism is both a particular and also a universal religion. there is a particular aspect for the Jewish people and the unique relationship that we have through the mitzvot, the Taryag, the 613 mitzvot, but that in no way excludes all of humanity. Because if we are believing in a God, a creator, and involved in the world, then he is the creator involved in the entire world, including every single human being that is here on the planet. And it doesn't make sense, to me, it's completely illogical to say that everyone has to become Christian, everyone has to become Muslim, everyone needs to become this or they're eternal damned, right? If everyone has been brought up different ways and all around the world, right? So this is the Parsha of the purpose of the Exodus. And going back, this is the Parsha of the purpose of creation. And it is titled Yitro. And Yitro was a convert. And to me, that speaks very, very broadly about the Torah being open for everyone, and how some of our greatest, right, here in our community and in Jewish history, some of our greatest have been people who have converted, who have come to join us and become part of the Jewish people, that have added so richly to who we are. You know, the famous story of Hillel, that the great sage Hillel, that he was impoverished and he didn't have the money to pay the pittance that one needed to pay in order to go into to spend your day in the Beit Midrash studying. So he went up onto the roof to hear the shir, to hear a certain class being given, and he fell asleep there, or the snow came. And when they came, that was on Friday. When they came Shabbat morning, they looked up by the sun, or the window they had over there, and they saw Demut Adam. They saw a form of a person, and they quickly went up there and pulled him down. They desecrated the Shabbos in order to heat him up, right, to save his life. And whose shiur, whose class was he climbing up onto the roof to hear? From Shemaiah and Avtalion, from two converts, right? And that's who he came to hear the shir from, converts or descendants of converts. That's who he came to hear the shir from. So the parsha of Sinai is here with Yitro. Vayishma Yitro. Yitro heard. Rashi brings famously, Ma shmua shama uba. What hearing did he hear? And he came. In other words, if you look back on page 378, where we had the Shirat Hayam, the song of the sea, that was sung after the splitting of the sea. So there on Pasuk, let's go to verse 13, right? Nachita b'chazdecha amzu ga'alta. With your kindness, you guided this people that you redeemed. Nehalta ba'azecha, you led with your might. El nevei kadshecha, on the way towards Israel to your holy abode. Shamu amim, verse 14, Yir Gazun, people heard and they were agitated. Chil achaz, terror gripped, Yoshve Palashet, those who dwelled in Palashet. Azniv halu, Alufe Edom, the chieftains of Edom, they were in a shock. Ele Moav, Yochazemu Ra'ad, and the powers of Moab, right? They were gripped with trembling. Namogu, Kol Yoshvei Chanan, all of the indwellers of Canaan, Nimogu, they like melted. Everyone, Tipol Aleim, Eimatav Afachad, right? That's how everyone heard of this, and everyone was overwhelmed. Later on, 40 years up ahead, when Yeshua is about to bring us into the land of Israel, and and he sends spies to clear the way, and they go to Rachav Hazona, and she tells them everyone is in absolute trembling fear of you guys coming. So everyone was shocked. Everyone was trembling. Everyone was in awe. And that's why Rashi brings from the Gemara, Mashmua Shama Uba. What is it that he heard and he came? Meaning, the key here, right? We all experience things in life that move us, that shake us somewhat. But then how long does it last? Right? Do we then decide to pivot, to make a turn, right? To go in a different direction in life? Or does it come and does it go? It's interesting. We say in the Shema, these words that I'm commanding you today, we say in the Shema, should be al, on your heart. And the famous question that's asked is, what do you mean on your heart? Let it be in the heart. Why on the heart? And I believe the Kutzke Rebbe answers very insightfully that a person's heart is not always open. So we need to put things onto the heart, and that way when our heart does open, there's what can fall in. There's what there is things there that can go in. So our heart's not always open. We're not always amenable towards listening, towards hearing, towards pivoting, right? But we need to put these things on our heart, and then when the time comes, we have what we need. Famously during the 6-Day War, so that's the first time in 1967 when Israel had control of the Kotel, and people flocked to the Kotel, and it was such a spiritual awakening. And for many people, that was a defining, pivotal point in their life. And for others, they had that moment, and then it faded. And they were back to where they were. Natalie shared with me that when she took one of her trips to Israel, and they went, one of her ladies' trips, and they went to the Kotel, and there was a woman, or actually an Israeli woman, who had grown up very, very secular, right? And the first thing she told Natalie when Natalie interviewed her was, I just want you to know, I'm secular, right? And there she was at the Kotel, and she came running to Natalie with her eyes wide open, like, what should I say? What can I say? What can I say? Right? So Natalie showed her the Shema, showed her different things to say. Right? There are times that our hearts are so open, and we need to make sure that the heart doesn't open and the heart then closes, and there is no gains along the way. Actually, it's fascinating that this woman, now her son is in college in New York and is part of a religious group there, that gives different classes, and has gone to spend Shabbat in Monsey, New York, in different very, very, very religious neighborhoods. And and this woman's friends are saying to her, "Oh no, aren't you afraid he might?" And she said, "No, let him get it, let him soak it in." Right? Had she not gone on that trip, her approach and attitude would have been very, very different. But yeah. So the great thing about Yitro is that he heard and he came. What is it Rashi goes on to say? Kriyat Yamsuf and Milchemet Amalek. He heard about the splitting of the sea and the war against Amalek, right? Right before Amalek attacked us, right? Here we are, right, on our way to Mount Sinai, just out of Egypt. We're not colonizers. We're not coming to take their land. Nothing of the sort. But Amalek just comes and attacks. So some explain that that's what prompted Yitro to come. That people can experience and hear about these miracles and say, no matter what, I'm going to fight against it, right? And therefore he realized just how dangerous it can be if a person doesn't act on things. And therefore he came, right? Simply Kriyat Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea, and the war against Amalek. So the Aznaim LaTorah, one of the great commentators, points out whenever the Torah is giving us different names or different pronouns, different descriptions of a person, it's there to teach us. So he was the Kohen Midian, and he was the father-in-law of Moses, of Moshe. And there were two different types of things that he heard. He heard about this revealed miracle. The revealed miracle was the splitting of the sea. And that's something that moved even a Kohen Midian, even a person who who had been involved in idolatry and is not yet connected to the Jewish people. But the war against Amalek, that was Chotein Moshe. That was as the father-in-law of Moshe, because that battle was a nes nistar, was a hidden miracle. Meaning, anytime there's a battle, I could always attribute it to, the excellent strategy, the better training, the better weaponry. Whenever there's a battle, it can always be attributed to natural means. Actually, it's one of the reasons, famous question, why do we have 8 days of Hanukkah? If there was enough oil for one day and it burned 8 days, how many days were miraculous? 7 days were miraculous. One day was oil burning. And one of the classic answers that's given is one of them is for the miracle of the battle. And some explain that the reason why we needed the miracle of the oil was to show that the battle was also miraculous, that God's hand was involved. Because otherwise we would say, wow, guerrilla warfare, they knew the terrain, be able to give all these explanations as to why we were victorious. So as a Chotein Moshe, as the father-in-law of Moshe, that's what enabled him to have that extra sensitivity to see the hand of God even in the war, even in that which we could attribute to just being natural. That's what happens. Some you win, some you lose some. Sometimes the underdogs come out on top. Therefore, Chotein Moshe, that enabled him to see that too was the hand of Hashem. And that's something that important for every person to have their eyes open to all of the hand of Hashem, all the miracles, all the things that go on, and not just attribute it to chance, to whatever, but to recognize. So he came, so he heard all that had done, and he came, right? And he brought Tzipporah, the wife of Moshe, right, and the two children. Asher Shem Echad Gershom, the name of one was Gershom, because he amar ger hayiti be'eretz nachriya, I was a sojourner in a foreign land, and the other one is Eliezer, because God saved me mecherev paro. God saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. God saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. That was when he had killed the Mitzri who was beating mercilessly a Jew to death, and he killed that Mitzri, and Datan Vaviram, the two no-goodniks, right? They spread the word. Paro heard. Paro wanted to kill Moshe. Moshe fled, and he fled. God saved him from the sword of Pharaoh. He had to flee from Egypt, and then years later, well, he was in Midian. That's where he ended up meeting his wife, Yitro, etc., etc. So what was actually the order of these events? Gershom, because I was a sojourner in a strange land. Eliezer, God saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. What was the chronological order? Was he first a sojourner and then saved? Was he first saved and then a sojourner? Right? So it seems, right, he was brought up in Egypt. He was in the palace in Egypt. Right? When was he a sojourner in a strange land? That's after he had fled from Pharaoh. After God had saved him from from the sword of Paro. So if that's the case, he should have named his first son Eliezer, God saved me, and the second one that now I'm a traveler, I'm a sojourner in a strange land. Why is the order like this? Why would he first?
Know he was going to have a second son.
He didn't know he was going to have a second son.
So the first one was more important.
So I'm a sojourner in a strange land. Okay. And then, right, sometimes you only, there's a family that I know very well that the first two children were girls. So they named the girls after grandmothers who had passed away, right? Then the third daughter was born. So they took the man's name and they feminized it for a grandfather who had passed away. So the daughter had a feminized man's name. And then when the son was born, they had to take a grandmother's name and masculinize it, right? So you don't always know what's coming, what's further upstream. So you don't always know. So you want to say the most important thing was I was a foreigner in a foreign land, right? And in another sense, then he reverted back. Okay, possibility. Esther, you want to say something before?
I mean, I think that maybe him being in Egypt was the foreign land.
Yeah. Okay. So the
I think
Chavetz
with him,
Chaim.
he kind of knew, like,
Yeah. The
something-
Chavetz Chaim and Esti, you're in good company.
Yeah.
The Chavetz Chaim and Esti say that Moshe, even when he was in Egypt, right, it says he was there in the lap of luxury in the palace, and he went out to see how his brothers were doing. So he recognized that even there, he was a stranger in a strange land. And I think to a certain degree, we all feel that a little bit now, more than we did before since October 7th, right? That all of a sudden the the sheep's clothing is off from the wolves, and we see how many of the people around us feel, and we realize that as comfortably settled as we might be here, right? Maybe it's not. Maybe we are a sojourner in a strange land. I remember when we had a Beth Jacob Poland Israel trip, and the guide was telling us when we were in Poland that the Jewish community was in Poland for close to 900 years. 900 years. And Poland, the Hebrew Yiddish is Polin, right? And that could be broken down into two words. Po, here, lin, we will rest, we will sleep. Meaning here's where we will be, right? And we know how that ended up. So a Jew always needs to feel that we are a sojourner in a strange land. And Chavetz Chaim takes it even a step further. And if we go back to what we said before, the purpose of creation is that there be free-willed beings who can make a choice to connect to God and thereby have that ultimate connection to God. So every single one of us, no matter where we are, our neshama, our soul, is a ger be'eretz nachriya, right? In other words, according to that understanding, the neshamot, the souls, were all up in heaven, but not having free will, being there in the overwhelming presence of God, and therefore we need to be sent down into a foreign land, into a physical body, into this physical earth, which presents us with temptations, with choices that we need to make. And that is who and what we are all about. So that really is chronologically even the first event, whether it is him being in Egypt or whether it is walking this earth, that we are there as travelers on borrowed time, and needing to, as the Chavetz Chaim puts it, pick up the diamonds that are lying all around. And the diamonds are the Torah, the mitzvot, the good deeds that we do to one another, those are the diamonds that are so readily available to us only here during our lifetime over here.
So since you brought up time, I had heard that he said that we were in Mitzrayim because of Lashon Hara.
Yeah, so he's basing that.
And so then, like, the corollary is like, was it like foretold that we were going to be in Mitzrayim hundreds of years ago? So if it's because of Lashon Hara, could we have prevented it and it was foretold?
Yeah. So if you want to take a look, and then if you want to take a look. When Hashem, so Moshe goes and he smites. Just 1 second. Go to page 298. Right, this comes back to something that Estia brought up also, and now what you're bringing up, Judy. Look on page 298. That's the Shemot, chapter 2, verse 11. And it was in those days, Vayigdal Moshe v'yitzei lachav. He went out to his brothers and he saw their suffering, and he saw an ish mitzvah, an ish man, makeh, beating, an ish ivri, me'echav, from his brothers. Again, twice it mentions his brothers in this pasuk. Right? So as Esther said, he felt that he was a stranger all along. He turned this way and that, and he saw there was no man. And he smote the Egyptian, and he hid him in the sand. And he went on the second day, on pasuk 13, and behold, there were two men, two Ivrim, Nitzim, arguing. When he said to one of them, Larasha, Lama Tacher, why are you hitting your friend? And he said, Misam Chaliish, Sar L'Shafet Aleinu. Right? Who appointed you as an officer, as a judge on us? Do you want halagena to Omer? Do you want to kill us? Kasher Rakta et HaMitzri, as you killed that Egyptian? Vayira Moshe was very afraid. Vayomar, and he said, Achein, no da davar. The matter is known. Simple meaning, the matter is known, that it's known that I killed this Egyptian, and therefore I'm in danger now. However, Rashi brings kamashma'o. The simple meaning is simply that. And then he says, second column in Rashi, second line, Umidrasho, the medrash is, Nodli adavar. Now I understand the matter, Shayiki Tama'alav, that I was wondering about. Ma chatu Yisroel mikol ayin umot. What sin has Israel done? Liot niradim ba'avodah parech, to be so broken down with such hard work. Aval roa ani shem ru'uyim lekach. Now I see that this is something that was coming to them because of this lashon hara. That's, I believe, what the Chavetz Chaim is basing it on. So, Judy, so you're asking, well, if that's the case, wasn't it foretold that we would be in Mitzrayim, right? So, yes. Strangers in a strange land, correct, right? So it could be, right? The Rashi's words are niradim, the reason why we're suffering so much, meaning there are different levels of servitude that we had to have gone through, right? There was a minimal level of servitude, and the Egyptians added on to it quite a bit. So maybe that was, why were they able to add on to it? Maybe that was because of the Lashon Hara. Or we always have the great paradox that Rambam brings of Bechira and Yediyah. Bechira is our free will. Yediyah is God's knowledge. And the Rambam presents that as a great paradox. If God knows, then it's already set. Then do I really have free will? Right? And the Rambam says that we can't, right? So therefore, with that, right, God knew that we would choose to have this issue with Lashon Hara speaking, and therefore that was all contained in what would come our way, right? The way Rav Dessler explains it, which which I which resonates with me, is I'll give an example, right? If I would tell you guys that I actually have a time machine and I traveled here to this morning and I took notes, right? And the notes say that Kathy's going to be wearing a colorful blouse, right? And Estee's going to be wearing a grayish sweater, and Judy's going to have a greenish jacket over a black blouse, and Dove will be here with his chai hat, right? So then, right, everyone had their complete free will to decide what they were going to wear when they came here today. But I, by virtue of my time machine, not being bound by time, I was able to zip forward and see exactly what everyone did. And Bereshit, in the beginning, one of the first creations was time. And actually, Ramban says this, and physics says this, that time there's only time when there is matter, right? So with the creation, that's when time began. But God is beyond the realm of time. And therefore, the way Rav Dessler puts it, if I would have a table, a cloth over this entire table, and this entire table is my life. This is birth. That's the very end after 120 years, please God. Right? And there's a little hole in this cloth, and it slowly, slowly is moving forward and revealing different aspects of my life. That's the past, there's the present, that's the future. As this cloak of time moves forward, what was the present became the past, and what was the future is now a little bit closer. Some of it is the present, right? So when we have this cloth, this cloak of time, so then that's all we see. We wonder what's up ahead. But if God, who's not bound by time, looks under the cloak, then everything there is revealed. So whenever we have these questions, these conundrums of, well, it's because of this, but God said it was going to happen. So the way that we somewhat wrap our head around it is this Bechira Yediya paradox that the Rambam brings. The Ravid, one of the commentators of the Rambam, asks, if you're not going to answer the question, then you shouldn't ask it, right? You're planting doubts into people's minds. So the Rambam does answer it, but his answer is not a clear answer. His answer is that knowledge is a borrowed term, meaning anytime we apply something like that to God, it's a borrowed term. So by us, when I have knowledge, that precludes the free will. But by God, God's knowledge is not anything like our knowledge, but we use that term because that's a term that we have. So we have to always break things down into human terms. But God's knowledge is one that does not preclude free will. That's what the Rambam basically says. So the Rabbi says, so why are you asking the question? We're not really going to answer it. And some explain on behalf of the Rambam was concerned that some of us might come along and say, hey, I've got a big question on Judaism. 1 second. If God knows, then how do I have free will? So then why is there accountability? I've just turned over. I've just shown how Judaism doesn't make any sense, and therefore I'm going to drop the whole thing. So the Rambam wanted everyone to know, I know the question. I have the question. It's a paradox, and I'm still the Rambam, right? That's not a reason to, right? But as he says, right, God's understanding is something that we cannot even fathom. It does not preclude free will. And the way Rav Dessler explains it, at least to me, it becomes a very understandable. We're so locked into the realm of time that we can't imagine not being there. But God is not locked into the realm of time, and therefore there is that yediyah. Let's zoom up ahead a little bit, and let's come to page 400. is leading up to the Ten Commandments. And these psukim, just one other thing, I'll go there, but it's one other thing to keep in mind. So Rashi is learning that Yitro is in chronological order. That he came, he heard and he came. What did he hear? Rashi said, Kriyat Yamsuf, and the war, the splitting of the sea and the war against Amalek. That's what happened immediately before that. Then he came, and then we have the whole Sinai experience. There are those that say he came after Sinai, in which case, if he came after Sinai, so then, right, what did he hear about? He heard about Sinai, right? That's going to eclipse, a war against Amalek or the exodus from Egypt. So the Torah is always in order. However, the Torah is not always in chronological order. There are different orders for things. So there's always an order for the Torah. It's not necessarily in chronological order. Those who say it's in chronological order would say, okay, so we had the Exodus, we had Amalek, we had Yitro coming, and now we have Sinai in the order that it's written. But there are those that say it actually came afterwards. Yet the Torah wrote about Yitro's coming beforehand. So why would the Torah do that? Meaning, what is that order? Or what is so important that we need to know about Yitro, even though he actually came after the Torah being given? We need to know about Yitro before we read about the Torah, before we get to Kabbalat Torah, before we get to accepting the Torah. It's important to us to know about Yitro. So why might that be? Why might it be so important for us to know about Yitro that even though, according to those opinions, he actually came after the Torah was given, the Torah tells us about it beforehand because we need to know this before we get to Sinai. What is this? What is it that perhaps we might need to know? What is it that Yitro teaches us that we need to know before we could read and learn about Sinai? Dov, what do you want to say?
He's the expert on everything else.
Okay, that's a nice idea, Dov. So to realize that someone who knew, as we mentioned before, about all other forms of spirituality, of idolatry, of everything, he came, right? And therefore, so that's an interesting lesson, right? You don't need to explore everywhere, right? You have during the time of the cults in the 70s, a lot of cults. Remember, Hare Krishna was at every airport with their ponytails, and the Moonies were there with their flowers. 1970s, that was so pervasive. Wherever you went, you were just confronted with that. And Jews were always overrepresented, right? In these, they tell the story that Mrs. Goldberg, right, and with the gurus, and in India, tell the story. Mrs. Goldberg, right? She never traveled. She was taking a trip. Her neighbors asked her, Mrs. Goldberg, where are you going? I'm going to India. Why are you going to India? I'm going to India. Why? I don't want to tell you. I'm going to India. Right, how long are you going for? I'm going for 3 days. Going to India for 3 days. I'm going for 3 days. Gets to India. She travels and she comes to the big Maharaji. She wants to speak to the guru, right? And they said, no, people make appointments months in advance to see the great guru. She said, I want to speak to the guru. I'm sorry, you can't. I just 3 words. She insists, finally say, okay, but only 3 words. She goes into the presence of the great Maharaji guru, and she says to him, Marvin, come home, right? So Jews have always been overrepresented in all these things. We're always searching around, trying to find this, trying to find that. So Dov's idea is that we need to know that Yitro, right, with all of his knowledge, right, you don't have to taste everything. You don't have to go explore everything. You've got it. You've got the treasure right in your own backyard. Don't go traveling around. Nice. Any other ideas? So a couple that we've touched upon is the idea of Gerin, right? That going into Matan Torah, we need to know that it's not to the exclusion of everyone else, and that this is something that we are open to, not something that we push for. But like we said before, some of our greatest have been people who have joined us, Jews by choice, who have joined our people. And also, I think what we said before, Vayishma, Uba, that we have to, in order to accept Torah, we need to have our minds and hearts open and be willing to see what's going on around us and have it move us, have it affect us. So let's look over here now. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh gives three other things that are prerequisites from the Torah, and he looks at chapter 19, verse 1. B'chodesh HaShlishi, in the third month, let's say from the time we left Egypt, on this day, Ba'u, we came Midbar Sinai, to the desert, the wilderness of Sinai. Pasuk Bet, Vayis'u me Refidim. We traveled from Refidim, Vayavo'u Midbar Sinai. And we came to Midbar Sinai. Now, if we were kids in class and we had these two sentences and the teacher asked, what should the order of these sentences be? So we would put the second verse before the first verse. The second verse says where we traveled from, and then we came to the Midbar Sinai. We came to the wilderness, the desert of Sinai. So why does it say in verse 1, we came to Midbar Sinai, and in verse 2, tell us where it was that we traveled from in order to get there? And then repeat, and we came to Midbar Sinai. Vayachanu, and we camped in the Midbar. Vayichan Sham Yisroel Neged Ahar. This is a very, very, very famous pasuk. Vayichan. So those who have the more nuanced understanding of the Hebrew language, Vayichan is in the singular. Vayachanu would be the term for camping when they camped. Vayachanu Sham Yisrael. Israel camped there in the plural. It doesn't say that. It says Vayichan in the singular. Rashi famously says Ki ish echad belev echad, like one person with one heart. That there was this complete unity. Now, just look back for a minute. And there's an interesting nuance there also. When the Egyptians are chasing us, take a look on page 370. When the Egyptians, we left Egypt, and then Paro says, let's bring them back. It says there, Paro Hikriv, Paro approached. We discussed that last week. Vayisu b'nei Yisrael et einayim. Israel lifted up their eyes. V'hinei, behold, Mitzrayim, Egypt, or the Egyptians. Once again, Noseya achareihem. Now, Egyptians should be plural. It should say Nosim in the plural, traveling after them. Why does it say Noseya achareihem? Rashi says almost the same thing. Rashi says, Belev echad ki ish echad, with one heart, like one person. Over here, Rashi said, like one person with one heart. There he says, with one heart, like one person. All right? And he explains, and not he explains, but others explain, when it comes to the nations of the world, when they have that leiv echad, when they have that same goal, they come like one person, right? But as long as they have that same motive, that same idea that's moving them, right? You look in the Arab world, right? They're killing one another left and right, right? When it's against Israel, then for the most part, they all join together, right? That's b'leiv echad. When they have leiv echad, then they are ki'ish echad. But as soon as they don't have that, then they go back to killing one another. Israel was different. Israel is ki'ish echad. It's like one person. If I'm one with you, right? We'll come to this again, the idea soon, right? There's no jealousy when it comes to my children. There's no jealousy when it comes to my students. That's what the Gemara says. There's no kin and no jealousy when it comes to children or when it comes to Talmidim, when it comes to students. Why? Because it's ki'ish echad. It's like one person. So that which my children are accomplishing, that doesn't, like, how come they're doing it, I'm not? No. It's all, that's the royal we. That's all of us together. My students, beautiful. Right? We are ki'ish echad. Hello, Ken. Good morning. We are ki'ish echad. We are inherently like an ish echad, and that's what makes us leiv echad. That's what gives us that one heart. So again, the psukim are a little bit strange over here. They came to Midbar Sinai. We said that in verse 1. Verse 2, they tell me they left Rephidim and they came to Midbar Sinai, reiterating, and they camped there. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh says that this is teaching us not simply where we left from, but it's letting us know the three prerequisites for Kabbalat HaTorah in order to accept the Torah. Number one, he says, Vayis'u me Refidim. Refidim means weakness. You need to be, there can't be laziness. There needs to be strength. There needs to be a moral, emotional, psychological, spiritual strength. Vayis'u me Refidim. The way that Judaism views strength, right? Famously, we say in Ethics of the Fathers, Ezehu Gibor, who is a powerful person? What's the answer? Hakovesh et Yitro, someone who can control their impulses, control their drives. And the Mishnah there brings a pasuk, Tov Ish, I forget now, I don't have exactly, may locate ear, right? A person who can control them, Moshel Burucho, a person who can rule over his own spirit is greater than a locate ear, than one who will conquer a city, right? It takes less strength, right, to impose my strength, my will onto others. The greatest strength that's required is to impose my will over myself, to control myself, to do what I know I should be doing, even when I don't feel like doing it. That is the greatest strength. So first of all, we needed to leave from refidim. We needed to leave from a state of laziness, from a state of weakness, to being ready to accept this discipline on us. And just talking to somebody yesterday who just now, I think this past Shabbos was the first time this person kept Shabbos, and has been wanting to for a while, but has decided now to be Shomeret Shabbat, keep Shabbos. And she was saying how, it took so long. It was such a hard decision. And when she did it, she said the last Shabbos was the most beautiful day. And now she's wondering why. Why did I wait so long? Turning off the phone, turning down the computer, not having all of that, just having time to be with people. It takes the strength, and then once a person does it, they realize, wow, it is a gift. It is a gift. So that's number one. He says you have to leave, travel from refidim, for weakness, to a point of strength, and then vayavo midbar Sinai. You need to come to a state of mind, he says, that is midbar. Midbar is an empty, desolate wilderness, right? Everyone, he says, are called dorchim alav. Everyone steps on that. A person needs to have. We've been doing this with our duties of the heart. Chovos Halevavos. We're finishing up now the shar, the gate of humility. And he says humility, that is the bedrock foundation for anything positive in Jewish life. All the good midot, everything. It's to have that humility, to have this sense of thank you, Hashem, for all that you've given me. You've given me so much more than I ever could possibly deserve. So a person needs to be a midbar, has to have that humility. And who was the most humble of all people? Moshe, right? So the question is always asked, how can Moshe be the most humble of all people? He's the number one. He knows he's the number one. When he didn't want to be the one to take us out of Egypt, he said, let Aaron do it, let Yoshua do it, let anyone else do it. God said, no, you're the man. And when it came to splitting the sea, you're the man. And when it came to ascending Mount Sinai and receiving the Torah, you're the man. And when it came to the highest level of Nevuah called Ispaklaria HaMe'ira, and the way it's explained is everyone else sees God, the prophets, through like a foggy window, condensation, like was driving this morning, early this morning, very foggy, right? Moshe had this absolute clarity. See, he's the man. How could he be the most humble when he is the number one man of all time? But that's the answer. Because he had that clarity of God, so he recognized who and what God was, and therefore he had that humility. So number two, he says, is this anivut, this humility. And lastly, as we said, vayichan sham Yisroel neged hahar, right? That we camped as one person by the sea, by the mountain, and that is to have that unity, to have that sense of caring for one another. The Gemara tells that during a particularly impoverished time, forget during the time of which sage it was, it said that 6 people would share one blanket. Now, how could one blanket possibly successfully cover 6 people? The only way it can is if each person is concerned that the other one should be covered. If I'm just looking to share it, mine, yours, it's not going to work. When each person is concerned, oh, you need to be covered, you need to be covered. Everyone's worried about covering the other person. That's how it can be. That's ki'ish echad b'leiv echad. When we recognize that we are all one, we are all on one team, we are all connected in the spiritual level, and your success is my success, and my success is your success. And I just want everyone to be beautiful in God's eyes, and everyone should be doing the best they can be doing. When that's ki'ish echad b'leiv echad, that's how we can then go into Kabbalat Torah. So we go into this week where we're reading about Yitro and Kabbalat Torah. We need to go in there with strength, with humility, and with the sense of unity. And certainly, I think the Jewish people have become a lot more unified based on the events that happened and have been continued to go on. I saw an amazing video this morning of the chief rabbi of South Africa. It's about a 9-minute video. Chief Rabbi, I think Goldstein, and he's speaking so stridently that we might have heard in the news that South Africa kicked out the top Israeli diplomat. But he gives a little more background on it. And that is, there's a certain part there in South Africa where there's virtually no there's virtually no drinking water that's fit for human consumption. And Israel, right, had people there. Israel, who was a leader in water conservation and water purification, was there helping them, right? But the optics, because the South African government paints Israel as the most despicable, horrific, so they couldn't have the optics of Israel helping people from, especially the impoverished, from saving them from drinking contaminated water and dying, right? The optics was just too was too harmful to what they wanted. So therefore they kicked out and let their people die, right? And he speaks so stridently, right? Ramaphosa, whatever his name is, you are cursed, and your government is cursed, and you're putting your own personal things ahead of your own people, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. You are cursed. Your government is cursed. As he's talking, I was just afraid that also I can see these guys knocking down the door and dragging him away over there. Yeah, but yeah, it's a time when the world is taking its turns. We have to recognize who we are and where we stand, and who with whom we need to stand. Ki ish echad v'lev echad, like one person with one heart, and to be there strong and for one another. Yes, Dov. Yeah. That is a teaching. Sinai was a low mountain to teach us that idea of humility. Okay, good. Linda, good having you join us. We'll call it over here.